everyone. You are in the right place. We will get started momentarily. So get comfortable and give us about a minute and we'll get started. Yes, and we already have a little action in the Q&A. Day, Karen Reppin is saying, hey, Day. All right, we'll get started in just a minute. Day, you also have a shout out from Jennifer Jewel's sister. She's so glad to see you. We already have the Day fan club showing up. I love it. Well, I will go ahead and get started because we are all going to be a fan of the Day, be a part of the Day fan club very soon. Welcome, everyone. We are just so delighted that you are here for this conversation. And this is a conversation that I've really been looking forward to. I have had the pleasure of reading Day's books. I'm trying to see if y'all can see them, and just being immersed in his work and even trying my hand at the morning altar. So I really can't wait to have his insights and wisdom for this hour. So welcome, welcome. We are so very glad that you are here. Before we dive in, we have a few little housekeeping notes. First, the chat function is disabled, but you'll be able to submit questions and comments using our Q&A found on the right side of the bottom control bar of your Zoom window. And depending on our timing today, we may not get to all of our questions, but I will really try hard to get to some of them. But if we don't get to your question, we'll be responding to them via email in the next 2 weeks. So be on the lookout for that. You'll get the recording and also some of the answers to some of the questions that you submit. Also, to enable live transcription, click the CC/live transcription button, also on the right-hand side of the bottom control bar of your Zoom window. And this will provide you with options to enable closed captions throughout the webinar. And lastly, you can also move me and Day around on the screen by clicking and dragging them to your desired position. So if you want to move that around a little bit. And so this is what we're hoping to cover in our time together, and I'm sure that we will, and so much more. We're going to discuss the power of ritual in experiencing grief and the beauty and comfort we may find in our own backyard. We are going to also explore options for ritual at times of transition, and also offer resources for those interested in connecting with Day and also in CNC's work. All right, so let me tell you a little bit about Compassionate Choices for those of you who are unfamiliar with our work. Now, Compassionate Choices is a national nonprofit whose mission is to improve care, expand options, and empower everyone to chart their own end-of-life journey. And we hope today's webinar will provide you with some tools for that and some information to support your own informed decision-making. So I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I am the Faith Outreach Manager for Compassionate Choices. And in my faith engagement work, I've had the opportunity to connect with diverse and wonderful faith communities all around the US to advance the mission of Compassionate Choices. And let me tell you, whenever we are having these conversations that affirm life while also accepting the inevitability of death, I can never get that right off my tongue, things get really deep, really quickly. And in many of those conversations, I hear people hungering for meaning and connection and ritual around these issues. Prior to my work with Compassion and Choices, I worked as a hospice chaplain, and people often told me, I don't think people want to see the chaplain anymore. But I did not find that. I saw the complete opposite. I saw people who are really desiring opportunities to make meaning and to be encouraged to be fully present during these difficult but really holy moments. It's almost like our default is to be distracted. So I am so happy that Day's work calls us back to ourselves and to witness and mark these significant moments in our lives. And I think you will see just so many wonderful tools in his work. So I'll read his official bio and then give you a few other notes. Day Schildkret is internationally renowned as the author, artist, and teacher behind the Morning Altars movement, inspiring tens of thousands of people, me included, to make life more beautiful and meaningful through ritual, nature, and art. With nearly 100K followers on social media and sold out workshops, installations, trainings, and public speaking events worldwide, BuzzFeed calls Day's work a celebration of nature and life. Day has worked for close to 2 decades with thousands of individuals, communities, and organizations to help heal the culture through a meaningful and creative response to marking personal and collective change. Day is the author of Hello, Goodbye, 75 Rituals for Times of Loss, Celebration, and Change, which hit Amazon's #1 book in 3 categories, as well as Morning Altars, a 7-step practice to nourish your spirit through art, nature, art, and ritual. He's also the founder and principal instructor of the Morning Altars practitioner and teacher training. In addition to this bio, his work has been deeply meaningful to the staff at Compassion and Choices. As you can imagine, this work isn't always easy. Many of our supporters and champions come to this work through their own terminal diagnosis or through the grief after death of a loved one. And that loss and grief is profound, and having Day's practices and tools have really been an anchor for people on our staff. And so we are so excited to be able to share his work with you today. So we're going to jump right in and let him read from his book.
Zena, thank you so much for that incredibly warm and colorful welcome. I'm so grateful to be here, and to all of the Compassion and Choices staff and friends and family. I'm so grateful. I don't take this kind of hospitality for granted. So thank you all for taking time out of your day to join me and to welcome me so much. And I'm looking forward to sharing some of what I've written about and learned over the years. And so I was asked to start us off today with a little reading from my most recent book, Hello, Goodbye, and maybe this will set the tone for the day. And I'm going to read from the last conclusion, called Goodbye. We'll start with goodbye. Every hello is a goodbye, and every goodbye a hello. Births and deaths, departures and arrivals, endings and beginnings. There cannot be one without the other. We wave our hands to welcome, and we wave them the exact same way to bid farewell. And even though at times we may believe that life only moves in one direction, if we can step back and broaden our gaze, we can see that these hello, goodbye moments hinge on a door that swings back and forth. This book is about rituals. Rituals place us right at that door's threshold, and their purpose is to help us acknowledge that something happened. Something has changed. We are no longer the person we were. We no longer have the relationships we did. We no longer call this place home. Our child is not the same. Our body is not the same. This time is not the same. Rituals mark distinctions, helping us recognize what was and what is, so that we can wonder how it came to be. How did my child become a teenager? How did I just survive cancer? How did I get to be 50 years old? To wonder like this takes real courage and a deeper vulnerability because to see change is to be changed. And I'll pause right there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Day. Day, that's such a great introduction because I'd love to hear one of the things I thought about, and then I went on a Google search to try to find out who said it. But I remember reading years ago that basically the paraphrase of the quote was, you can tell how well a culture deals with grief by the number of rituals they have around it.
Mm.
And I just remember being like, oh, that explains so much about our culture and about and the lack of ritual we have
Yeah.
around grief and the difficulty we thus have processing the grief. And so I would just love to know what called you to write this book, especially in this time where it feels so anchoring for so many people.
Well, I mean, we are in a grieving time, whether or not we know it. And this book, I'm actually in the very same place on the very same island right now where I wrote this book. I just got here about a week ago. And the last time I was here, about a month into my stay, the pandemic hit. And like many of us, the floor fell out from under me. My work fell out from under me. My family's health fell out from under me. My sense of certainty fell out from under me. And I was grasping, as many of us were, for some semblance of certainty or normalcy or reliability at the time. I mean, even this very book that I was supposed to write, I had a publisher, and I mean, even that was fading. Everything was just so uncertain at the time. And so I was in a tiny house, just like this one that I'm in at the southern part of this island. And when the pandemic happened, my cell phone, maybe like yours, was texting and ringing off the hook with fires to put out. And so I made a commitment to myself. If this book was to be born, if I was going to write anything about ritual, I needed to do a ritual every day to ground myself in the midst of this vast sea of uncertainty. And so I just happened to have the good fortune of this house being across the street from the sea, at a place called Seabright, which is actually just about 20 minutes down the road from here. And I put my boots on every morning, no matter what. Before the phone rang, I would get in my boots, I would grab a basket, and I would just walk about 5 to 10 minutes to the sea. And I'd collect, you know, pine cones and leaves and flowers and whatever was that season was. And I'd go to the sea and I'd sit on the sand and I'd watch the waves come and go, and I'd hear the seagulls and I'd hear the sea otters, and I would just ground myself into the place. And I'm known for someone that makes beautiful art out of nature, beautiful altars out of nature. That's my kind of the bedrock of my career in the last 10 years of my life. And they have an artistic flair to them for sure. But at that time, for almost 2 years, every day when I went to that sea, I did not make a beautiful altar. I made one out of necessity. I made one because I had to, and I only spent about 5 minutes because I had to put these fires out. And so I just sat down on my hands and knees, and sometimes I would cry, and sometimes I would wonder, and sometimes I would laugh, but always I would put down this small altar at the base of that sea, and I would just remember what sanity felt like, just what life felt like by listening to the natural world. And then I would leave that altar, which would get taken away by the waves of the sea. And I would go back to my tiny home, put on my phone, and really put out the fires that many of us had during that time. And I wrote that story as the preface to this book, the one I'm telling you right now. I wrote that story as the preface because I needed to tell that story. I needed to tell the story of how ritual kept me sane during an insane time. And so really that's the main focus that I'm going to bring today, is that as things continue to change, both individually and collectively, because they are, and they're accelerating in fact, the change. Maybe you can feel it. I can. We need ways to put some temporary ground under us so that we could feel like we're not just free falling in the change. And ritual does that. Ritual provides us some temporary ground to stand on so that we can get oriented to where we are or who we are or who we're with. In that introduction that I just read you, I used a word threshold, right? So this is a word that I go on about in my book. We don't really use the verb anymore to thresh. Most of us are not threshing grain, right? But the word itself, the threshold, is a kind of a clue towards what that means, which is it's a word that acknowledges distinctions. It basically says this doorway, this gateway that we're walking through, we're no longer going to be the person that we were when we walk through that threshold, or we're no longer going to live in the house that we were living in when we walked that threshold, or we're no longer going to be at the job that we were in when we walked that threshold, or we no longer have the society that we've had when we walk through that threshold. And so we need ways to mark the threshold so that we can orient on the other side of it. And so rituals help us do that. They help us orient towards change.
That is so wonderful. Thank you so much for that explanation.
Yeah.
One of the things that I noticed when I was working as a hospice chaplain is almost the ways in which people cede kind of ritual to clergy. And the idea that, like, I remember so many times where I would be the on-call chaplain and they would just want me to say a prayer or say a few words, in the middle of the night, because it's like we've in many ways ceded ritual to what we think of as the professionals.
Exactly.
But one of the things I love about your book is you call it a cookbook of rituals, and kind of granting permission once again for people to take those rituals back and reimagine them and make them their own. And so why that approach to this work for you? What came up for you for that?
I'm looking for a phrase I coined called a ritual renaissance in the culture. Yeah, I want there to be a ritual renaissance. Why? Because ritual many, many, many years ago once belonged to the people. It belonged to the people's imagination. It belonged to the people. It was sprouted from need, right? And then somehow or other along the way, ritual started to belong to certain peoples, or belong to, let's say, clergy, or belong to religion. And so we now live in a culture that's ritually literate for the most part. Yeah, so we look to others to perform our rituals when we're needed, and that's few and far between. Maybe a wedding ceremony or a birth, but living a ritualized life every day is not something most of us do. We call like coffee a ritual, but it's really a routine, right? And so I call this a book for the ritual curious, by the way, because I want this to appeal to people that know in their bones that ritual could be helpful. It could reorient us towards what matters and what's important. But I call it for the curious because maybe you're intimidated, or maybe you don't know what to do, or maybe you've never done it before and you're too scared to touch it, or whatever the reason is. And so a lot of the way I introduce the book is as a ritual cookbook. And I go into the story in the introduction about a recipe that's been passed down through the generations in my family. It's we call it Mandel bread, which means almond bread in German. And I grew up on this bread. It's like a very soft biscotti. It's delicious. And it was passed down through my great grandmother, my grandmother, my mother, probably way further back. And I have it. And so just like ritual, cooking and baking is something that's possibly passed down through the generations. And also with this mandel bread recipe, I reinvent it. So I'm using gluten-free flour and chocolate chips because I like them, and I'm using California almonds when I live in California, and I manipulate the recipe to serve the needs that I have. And ritual also has that adaptability, that adaptive quality. It can be something passed down, and it also has the quality of being readapted or reinvented or reimagined. Yeah. So just like a five-star chef, you can make a very elaborate meal and you can make a very elaborate ritual. Doesn't mean it's good or better. But also, just like my grandma, you can just cook up an egg and an omelet because that's basically all she knows how to make. And just same thing with ritual. You can do a very simple ritual, right? Just to get warmed up. And that's equally as good, sometimes even better because it's so simple and it just nourishes. It's not fancy. And so that is my mission with this book is I'm giving folks recipes. And I say many times, throw out part of it if it doesn't work for you. Yeah? We just want you in the kitchen trying to make something. If you burn something, great, try again. There's no guarantee that a ritual will work. That's what makes it magical. That's what makes it alive. Yeah? So rituals have this quality of they might work, they might be meaningful. And that means that they're unpredictable. So, what's beautiful about a ritual is that they are tending to the times that we're in, they're tending to the moment that we're in. And I call it a ritual cookbook because I want people nourishing themselves in that way and trying things again and again, time and time again, just like I did this morning in my kitchen. I made breakfast and I also made myself a ritual.
I absolutely love the word alive for ritual. Like that sounds, because I think so often we have what we think of as rituals that have been passed down, but they may not have the same resonance for us. And so thinking about how the image of the bread is really powerful. I remember reading once, it was a study, I think by the Harvard School of Social Work, that said that people who are grieving, but who have personal, private, and often secular rituals tend to navigate the grief process a little better than those who don't have that. But you mentioned this a little bit, but I would love, how do you distinguish something from ritual and routine? How do you define that?
So two things. I want to just point to something you just said and just raise it up because it was a beautiful point. Rituals in a way are a midwife towards grief. Yeah. So we live in a grief illiterate culture, also culture where people don't know how to grieve. And so they hold it or contain it or avoid it or push it away. And ritual provides a container so that people can step into this it's a limited time and limited space container, meaning a ritual has a beginning and an end. So it's a held, or can be a held container, possibly with witnesses, possibly not. But it's a space where people can feel some sense of holding, because oftentimes that's what's needed for the grief to move from us, is we need to feel held. Sometimes the grief is so enormous, the loss is so big that we don't feel like we can let ourselves kind of emerge or let ourselves go into it because it's too big. We'll lose ourselves. Ritual provides a container. It provides a structure. And so oftentimes it's as I said, a midwife towards grief. So I just wanted to speak to that, and we can come back to grief because I know it's an important conversation to have today. But to speak to routines and rituals, we often confuse these two words. I wrote in the introduction a little explanation about the distinction, and you could always look to the word to be faithful to the real meaning. And I love etymology, and I speak to a lot of etymology in my book because I love how words travel through time and place, and they change. And so routine sounds like something else, but if you look at the word, it has the word route in it, or route. Yeah? Because routines are acknowledging there's a point A and a point B. And they're helping you get from point A to point B. They're destination minded. So for instance, my bedtime routine, it's looking for me to get from my waking reality to my sleeping reality. And it's about brushing my teeth and cleaning up and, getting into bed, etc. But a nighttime ritual is very different, or a morning ritual, very different. It has no interest in destination. It's not interested in getting you from A to B. It's interested in meaning and reflection. That's it. So it doesn't care about, getting you through your morning and to get to your desk. What it's looking to do is when you wake up in the morning, it's looking for you to ask yourself, does it matter? Is it meaningful? Does waking up mean anything to you? If you remember that many people didn't wake up this morning, but you did, and you have a little ritual to acknowledge that you woke up once again, and you get to live your life as if it was the first day. Does that impact you at all? You know? So I have morning rituals in this book because we need to renew ourselves every morning. My own culture, I come from a Jewish culture, and my own culture teaches me that all of the time. There, we have so many rituals in the morning that we do so that we can renew ourselves. Because otherwise, life just keeps on going and we kind of get lost in that, right? But the renewal piece allows us to approach the day as if it was the first or as if it was the last. Either way, it renews our sense of wonder. And wonder is the language of ritual. It's how we speak in ritual. We speak in grief, we speak in wonder, we speak in praise. Yeah, which are not real languages of our everyday life. But in ritual, it is, to actually, I woke up at dawn today and I just took a moment to just say, I looked at the sky, which was like bleeding pink. And I just said, wow. And I did a little ritual, very simple, very simple. Not, I mean, I was too sleepy to do anything too elaborate. I did something very simple, but I just remembered I'm very blessed right now. Yeah. And I just got to orient towards this new day like ritual does. So very different than routine. By the way, it's a quick story. When I was writing this book, I had a coffee ritual when I wrote it. Not a coffee routine, a coffee ritual, meaning that every night before I went to bed, I took the filter for my drip, for my pour over, and with a pencil, I wrote one sentence of something that I learned that day that I wanted my morning self to remember. And I wrote it on the coffee filter and I left it right on the counter. And when I woke up in the morning, one of my rituals was to read that little learning and to make my coffee and to like really chew on it while I was making my coffee. Very simple ritual. Anyone can do it. It's not that elaborate, right? But it was a way to take just a normal routine of making coffee and to make it have meaning, which is really the ritual's purpose.
Oh, I love that. I would love to know, and just outside of the rituals around grief and loss, I know there are 75, but what are some of the transitions and celebrations you that are your favorite in the book and really where you really had fun creating the rituals?
I'd say the number one, and I'm becoming an uncle real soon. My sister-in-law is pregnant, and so I love the birth ritual that I wrote in the book. I love the becoming a father ritual, and I specifically absolutely love the becoming a big brother or big sister ritual. Because I worked with children for half of my life, especially teenagers. Um, and I love introducing rituals to kids, and I love introducing it to children, and I love introducing it to teenagers, because they need some semblance of recognition. Too often we have children who are not being recognized for what they're doing or what they're struggling with. For instance, becoming a big brother or big sister, that's a new role. It might not seem like a big deal to you, but for that little kid, it's a brand new role. And so I created a what I call a magical doorway ritual, where they literally walk through a decorated threshold and they get a crown on the other side of it to acknowledge the new role that they're partaking on and to have some significance in that. And maybe one of the best chapters I've written in the book by far is the puberty ritual, because I've taught teenagers for 15 years and I know some of the things they struggle with, and I know some of the things their parents struggle with. And they need places where they can feel their edge and they can feel their need in the community, their changing need in the community, and where parents can feel their changing role with their child. And so I wrote three rituals in the puberty chapter, and I'm very proud of them. And I really hope parents of teenagers or up and coming, preteens, look to that as a resource, because we really, I'm well into my mid age, but I'm devoted to the upcoming generations, and we need to give them as many tools as we can. And ritual is one of those tools that can really, really help a teenager transition into an adult. Those are some of my favorites.
I just grabbed the book because I also love, there's so much I love in it, but I really loved the big task ritual in the puberty section. Like, just, yeah, I have a teenager in my life. And
Oh, you
so
do.
I do. And so these were just such wonderful, and like you said, to mark the moment, because we know something's changing,
Yeah.
but having the ritual to mark the moment is
And if
very.
and if you don't, I mean, there's a I don't think we really talk about this enough, but if you don't mark it, and plenty of people don't, and that's okay, but there is a consequence to that. And sometimes the consequence is unexpressed grief. Sometimes it comes across where there's a real sense of grief in losing that marking, in acknowledging that marking. I'll tell you a brief story, real quick, which is a friend of mine yesterday came to me in tears, and she's about 40, 45 years old. And her and I were just on a Zoom, a blessing way on this past weekend for a friend of ours who's about to have a baby. And it was filled with mothers, 40 mothers. And this friend of mine is partnerless and childless. And she came to me in tears yesterday saying that all of her friends got markings when they had a baby. All of them, the community gathered around them to acknowledge them. All of them got to be marked when they got married. The community gathered around to acknowledge them. And she said, she's aging without a child and without a partner. And she feels like the community hasn't gathered around her to acknowledge this. And there's grief there. And she needs to be seen and heard in that grief. She needs a ritual. And so I just reminded her as my friend that I wrote a chapter in the book called Aging Rituals for Aging Childlessly. Because there's a real sense of, if you don't acknowledge that, it passes you by, and then certain feelings start to fester, like feelings of resentment or unexpressed grief or fear. And so I told her, I'm happy to be an anchor for her to organize this ritual because it's needed.
One of the things that really I feel throughout the book is the emphasis on relationship and community. There are so many, options where you can gather community for this ritual, and just why. I would just love to know, for you to speak to, why was that important for you? Um,
Community.
but yeah.
It's the same thing as I was talking about before, making a meal. I eat so many meals by myself, and that's fine. Nothing wrong with eating a meal by yourself. But there's something different about breaking bread with people, you love. There's something that happens around the table, some kind of table fellowship that happens when you're sharing a meal with other people, some kind of old meaning behind it. It's almost as if, we eat meals by ourselves if we have to, but, we really should be eating a meal with, especially a dinner, sharing it with other people and reflecting on the day and reflecting on our lives and telling jokes and sharing bread and etc. And ritual's no different. We can do a lot of rituals by ourselves, and I do plenty of rituals to mark my own moments, but there's something about being witnessed by other people. And this is a word that is a very important word when it comes to ritual. What does it mean to be witnessed? In the book, I actually reference another author, a West African author by the name of Bayo Komalafe, he plays with the word so beautifully, turns that word just a little bit and calls it witnessing, With, to stay with someone, with whatever they're going through, to not turn away because, let's say, it's uncomfortable, but to stay with them in their trouble or in their celebration, whatever it is. And so there's some kind of alchemical thing that happens when whatever you're bringing to the table in the ritual, where other people can turn to you and say, I'm with you, I'm not leaving you, I have your hand, I'm not turning away, you can cross this threshold with me, you're not alone. There's something very, very important to the human psyche that reaches us on a deep level to feel that sense of belonging, to feel that sense of, sometimes crossing that threshold is so vast. 2 days ago, short story, I tell the longer story in the book. 2 days ago is the anniversary of a woman I interviewed. Her husband, 10 years ago, this was 2 days ago, the anniversary. 10 years ago, her husband went out for a bike ride like he did every morning, hit a rock, flipped over, broke his neck, became a paraplegic. 10 years ago. Their lives went upside down. You know, their sense of money went upside down. Their sense of their future went upside down. Her relationship to their sex went up. Everything went upside down.
Mhm.
And she just could. I mean, it was so big. It was so epic how her life changed in a day, in a morning. And so she goes to that rock where he broke his neck every year, and she does a ritual with some of her friends every year. And she gets to be witnessed in sometimes her grief, sometimes her rage, sometimes her pleading for forgiveness, whatever she's feeling. Just three of her friends are with her, and they're with her, they're witnessing her.
Mm.
They're not turning away because it's uncomfortable or painful. They're just staying with her. And because the ritual has a container, it has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And so in the middle, she gets to express whatever she expresses, and then it's over, and they go back to their normal lives, and she feels like something has moved inside of her. And so that's why it's important I included it in the book, is because we all have moments where the threshold's just too big, and we need to be witnessed in that.
I the word witnessing just is so resonant. And I actually led a grief workshop at a retreat this weekend and used it, and people just automatically got it because that's so often what our grief and our life changes demands.
Hmm.
Um, I would like to, I'm going to ask you one more question, then I'm going to turn over to Q&A. Well, I'm going to let you read and then read a section, but then turn over to Q&A. But is there anything that just surprised you while interviewing and writing the book? Is there any revelations that just were like, oh my goodness, anything that just was
I'd
new?
I'd say the thing that surprised me the most, while I did almost 300 interviews for this book, I'd say what surprised me, I mean, I was on the receiving end of so many rich stories. That's not surprising. I was teary-eyed listening to them. What was surprising was how much the interviewee was receiving from sharing their story.
Mm.
So in some way, me interviewing them became this little ritual where I was just witnessing, I was just listening and asking good questions. And I was listening to them tell their story. Some of the time, this was the first time they told this story. Yeah. For instance, I interviewed a man who I'm not going to name because his name is changed in the book, and he's got cerebral palsy, and he was sharing about his experience being born with this. And but then that's not why I was interviewing him. While I was interviewing him was because about 10 years ago on a flight, he got a certain kind of disease that started out as just a normal cold, and that ended up, he said, wrecking him more than the disease that he was born with. And everything that he kind of scraped by to live as a normal person kind of started to erode. And he said, I've been suffering so much, I haven't had a chance to tell this story about how this little thing that I got on an airplane has brought me to my knees. And it was in him, we stayed on the phone for maybe 2 hours, and it was in me listening to him tell his story, that he was in some ways, um, it was getting integrated or something. It was landing differently because he just had someone who was curious to hear what was going on. So I'd say for me, the thing that surprised me the most was to just be on the receiving end and to witness how deeply rewarding folks telling their stories were. And I included them in the book, which was an honor.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
I've noticed that too in my work in chaplaincy. People will be like, that's the best conversation I ever had. And I wouldn't have said a word. And creating that space for stories. And we will have to have a part two because I really want to talk to you about the relationship between ritual and story, but that's a whole other conversation. But I would love for you to read a passage for us, and then we have some
Sure.
wonderful questions that I'd love to offer up.
Sure. And is this the last passage I'm going to read?
Yes.
Okay, here it goes. Ritual is always our most trusted guide during times of change. When everything is unsettled, ungrounded, and unpredictable, ritual can refocus us back to what matters. When things seem so fast and wild, ritual can slow us down and remind us what we are missing. And when fear and doubt pervade our waking moments, ritual can help us let go of what we're grasping onto and reconnect us to courage and resilience. When people die, jobs are lost, babies are born, relationships end or begin, the world panics. Ritual is there for us as a pathfinder through change. The more we can learn how to be in relationship with change itself as it happens, which is the very function of ritual, the more we can gracefully change too. One of the interviews in this book was with a mother whose 2-year-old daughter had been diagnosed with leukemia. After 2.5 years of chemotherapy, the last day of treatment was, as you can imagine, poignant and quite special. Her daughter had the privilege of ringing the hospital survivor bell 3 times to mark the end of her chemo. The sound, Karen said, was visceral and filled me with full joy, but also sorrow for those that didn't get to this point. Ringing the bell 3 times was not only a symbolic action that distinguished the end of her daughter's treatment, but a way to recognize how miraculous it was to arrive at that moment with sorrow and joy. A ritual's motivation is to compel us to, quote, pivot towards the sacred, a phrase coined by French anthropologist Arnold van Gennep. Pivoting to the sacred is a ritual's way to turn us towards and not away from the great mystery, the great uncertainty of our lives, which is always changing. It is a way to make these moments of hello and goodbye holy and beautiful.
Ah, wonderful. We have some amazing questions, so I want to get in as many as we can in our last few minutes. The first one is, I've heard you say that in our urgency culture, we don't stop to notice when things are changing. What are some of the clues we can look for that we are at a threshold? I love that question.
That's a great question. It's a wonderful question. Well, I think one of the most important clues that you could recognize that you're at a threshold is that things look relatively unfamiliar. So, I'm in my own threshold right now. I just actually wrote about this week in my newsletter that I send out to my audience. I moved out of my home last week, and I don't move into my next home for another 2 months. So I'm kind of in this what you would call a liminal time, right? All of my things, I have suitcases here. All of my things are kind of on the way to the new home or with me. And I kind of know I'm in a transition, if that makes sense, but I kept on losing things. Like I left my keys somewhere, I left my wallet somewhere, I left this, I left that, to the point where it was getting comical. And at the beginning, I was berating myself, like, oh, I can't believe you lost that or left that. Or, I mean, yesterday I jumped in, I'm staying right near a lake, and I jumped in with my earbuds in my pocket. And then I thought to myself, actually, this is a sign. It's not an affliction. This is a sign that I'm in a transition. This is not a problem. So losing things, the mess of this time right now is very much a sign that things are changing. And rather than seeing it as something wrong or something bad, or I should be more competent, or I should be more on top of my stuff, or I should have my things together, I'm just recognizing I'm in a different place right now. And so there's a lot more forgiveness. There's a lot more flexibility. There's a lot more humor that comes with that. I mean, I got out of the lake yesterday and I found it in my pocket and I just laughed, because what can you do in those moments? But it helped me remember that I'm in a liminal time. I'm in a threshold time right now. And there's different skills required in this time than in other times when I'm more on the other sides of the threshold. So I hope that's helpful to tell that story and to speak about those skills.
Oh, yes. Um, it's so funny because I have had something similar going on. So it's
Okay. I
very
got a
good.
lot of feedback from that newsletter that a lot of people can relate.
Yes, absolutely. Um, we have another question that we've gotten in a few different forms. Do you have a recommendation for a ritual for individuals who have gone through a painful and traumatic death of a loved one? Seeing a loved one in pain and in a state so different from what they've always been is very hard to navigate.
A painful death of a loved one.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say there's two rituals that I'm thinking about right now in the book. There's a chapter on death and dying. I've written three rituals in there. Um, and I broke them down into the day of the death, 7 days after the death, 30 days after. And I'd say in the book, the only time that I actually wrote a ritual that was related to creating a morning altar, which are those you saw at the beginning in that slideshow, I create these impermanent pieces of art made out of nature. The last ritual in that chapter is creating one as a way to remember and to metabolize the grief. So I'd say I'd reference that ritual specifically, and then there's a chapter in the book on near-death experiences, and I think that that ritual can actually apply to someone grieving their death, someone beloved to them's death as well. And the ritual is very simple. It's a stacking of rocks so high that they fall. And the ritual is to keep stacking, to be witnessed and to keep stacking the rocks. There's more to it, and you can reference the book. But the ritual is to really and here the language, I'm being intentional when I say this, to let them fall. So much of the time when we're going through loss, we're holding a lot. And especially my mother she's in mid-stage dementia right now. Her story is the introduction to the book. My family, we've been holding a lot for a long time. She's been in her journey now for almost a decade. And so I can imagine, she hasn't died yet, but I can imagine that when she does, there's this feeling of I've been holding so much for so long, and I don't know how to let go. And there's something, I don't know if you remember hearing me in what I just read, but I used the word symbolic action. Symbolic action. And that's a term that is associated with ritual, meaning ritual, you do something, right? You break something, you tear something, you burn something, you bury something. It's an action. And they represent something that we're going through internally. And so the stacking of the stones is that feeling, at least from how I developed and designed the ritual, that feeling of I have it together, I have it in order. And then you stack it so high that it falls, and you recognize that you're not in control. And to actually see that over and over again can allow the tears to move and can allow you to presence the grief and to continue to let go and to open our broken hearts up and to allow whatever else wants to come through. And so I'd reference that ritual as well, and many more in the book, but those are the two that come to mind.
Wonderful. All right, we have some more. Any advice for how to create space for grief with a friend who has lost a loved one? How do you escape the trap of doing? We always want to do for others, make dinners, etc. But how do we make room for their grief without both of you feeling uncomfortable?
Yeah, so I'd say there's certain and I write about this in the book as a kind of as the bones of the ritual. There's a subsection in the introduction called Rituals for Time and Place. And it helps to explain there's certain things that you can do to set the stage for the ritual, certain agreements and certain things. And so, for instance, there's an agreement of, hey, can we spend this amount of time together? Let's say it's half an hour, right? Can we agree to be in this time for this amount of time? I'll even set my alarm. I want this time. So setting a time container is really important. Second of all, allowing that time container to be uninterrupted. So no cell phones, no TV on, no distractions. We're going to be in this container for a certain amount of time, and we're putting away our phones and we're just going to be in that, right? So number three is something that says this time is different. So for example, lighting a candle, right? So I'm going to set my alarm for 30 minutes and we're going to light this candle. And when this candle is lit, we're in this container. And when I blow this candle out, we can go back to our cell phones and our TVs and our computers and whatever we're doing. But as long as this candle's lit, it's kind of like I used to work in the theater. It's kind of like when the house lights go down in the theater, you know the show's started, right? So it's the same kind of thing with ritual. When the candle's lit, or whatever it is for you, but that's a great, very simple example because we all have candles. When the candle's lit, we're in this thing, and we're going to be in this thing until it's over, and then I'll blow the candle out, and we're done. So there's things like that that I talk about in the book that can kind of help set the stage for any possibility for a ritual to be successful. Um, and then, there's many, many other things you can do, which I wrote about, but those are three very simple pieces.
Oh, those are so helpful. Let's see. I'll try to get to one or two more. Um, let's see. In a holistic health class, we learned about opening and closing ceremonies for ourselves, playing music, dancing. Are those considered ritual?
Music and dancing? Sure. Anything can, okay, so I use the phrase in that reading, pivoting towards the sacred. Remember I said Arnold van Gennep, he wrote an amazing book about 100 and something years ago called Rites of Passage. He coined this phrase, pivoting towards the sacred. Basically, what that means is anything can be made sacred. Anything. All it requires is a turning towards and making it so. So dance, music, all of that could be made sacred. It's just the question is, what for?
Mm.
What is it in service to? What is it for? What's its purpose? So anything can be mundane and purposeless and entertaining or whatever, and anything can also be made holy and sacred. And it's just I love the phrase pivot because it's an action word. It just means turning towards and making it so. And so dance and music, of course it can be. It's just the question is for what? What is the meaning behind it? And then, to remember that if you're going to dance, the question is why?
Very good. I'm going to ask one more. This is just funny because I was just telling a friend that I was doing this and sent her information about the book. And she said, he must be Jewish because Jewish people do ritual better than we do.
Oh.
But this question is, how does your Jewish culture inform your development of rituals? I've often thought that the bar and bat mitzvahs should be adopted by all religions.
So there's a variety of things that this beautiful questioner is asking, and I'd say first and foremost, my culture, my Jewish culture, is a golden thread through the book. There's so many ways that my people have taught me the importance of ritual and ritualizing, um, and and so I stand on those shoulders from the moment I wake up in the morning My morning ritual is deeply inspired by my culture and informed by my culture to the moment that I go to bed at night. To different points in the calendar and through the seasons and acknowledging the changing of times and the changing of seasons. To the need, one of our New Year's is coming up very soon, and acknowledging this sense of the need to renew ourselves every year. And so Judaism has really taught me quite a bit about how to ritualize, the need for ritual, and we do that in particularly well during times of death, death and dying. And so when I was writing this book, it was like no matter what I did, Judaism was here with me writing it. And I, rather than turning away from that, I actually wrote, I was inspired by that and wrote into that. Can you say the question again? Because there was one other thing that I wanted to add.
Sorry. Oh, it was about, I have often thought that bar and bat mitzvah should be adopted
Oh,
by religions.
thank you. Yeah. So, a bar and bat mitzvah is a ritual that we have, and one of our 12 to 13-year-olds turn 12 or 13, and it's a way of acknowledging that they are a child of a son, a daughter, it's kind of gendered, but a child of, or an adult of our commandments, essentially. But deep down inside, it is a thumbprint. It's an imprint of a time that we might not remember, which is a time when that age group needed to feel the bindings of initiation, of rites of passages, of an actual passage into adulthood. And so, the rituals I wrote in that book are in some ways trying to conjure the original intention of a bar bat mitzvah, which is in some ways to reveal the mystery at the center of a child's life, and to in some ways to remove their childness, from being at the center of their lives, and instead revealing this great mystery that we live in, and for them to find humility and service and responsibility and reverence and connection and wonder to be in relationship to that. And so if I had to reimagine a ritual for my own people, that would be it. You're touching upon it. And it would be in some ways to re-inspire and reimagine a ritual that reveals the great mystery that lives at the center of our lives and lives at the center of this world that we live in.
I could truly talk with you all day about this. And there are so many great questions. So please know if we did not get to your question, we will try our best to have an answer in the email. But I wanted to make sure in our last 2 minutes that you stay in touch with us and you know how to get these books because they are amazing. And Day and his team have offered a discount code. We will also follow up with this information in an email, but please check that out at morningaltars.com/shop and CNC guest, and you'll get 20% off of your books. So please take advantage of that. These books are amazing, and they just are gifts that keep on going. So please do that. So you will have his, and also follow Morning Altars on Facebook and Instagram so you can see what Day is up to next. And we would also love for you to connect with us in CNC. Here, we will have all these links in the email as well, but these are links to the work that we're doing in your state. And so some of our stories from our storytellers and also our end of life planning guide. We would just love to keep in touch with you. And I have to make a quick plug for my work. I'm in the faith engagement work, but faith engagement is not the best term because we work with everyone, agnostics, atheists, Christians, Jewish communities, Muslim communities. So if you are interested in this work from a faith or belief standpoint, please reach out to me. And my email will be on the email as well. Also, we are funded almost exclusively by donors like you. So please consider making a donation today. The website is there, and you'll also have that information from us in our follow-up email. I just want to thank you, everybody, so much for coming. Your questions, like I've been sitting here like, these are absolutely amazing. So I will make sure that Day gets them. And I just want to thank you for your time. And I just want to thank you, Day, for your wisdom and just your inspiration. So thank you so much for being with us today.
So grateful. Thank you. I'm so honored to be here and to share in this work with you. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. You will be hearing from us. Goodbye.